Oregon's got Wisconsin this week. We'll talk about the game. But first, we get to talk about Lanning to the NFL. Yeah, put me in the camp of I don't buy it.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, because FanDuel, that's the place you go to get a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I think Oregon over Wisconsin, a good thing to place such a wager on. If you are inclined, talk about the keys to the game. I'll talk about how I think Oregon wins. Do they cover? I suspect so. And what's up with the schedule right now, facing back-to-back teams off the bye? All coming up on today's show. But first, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, I think he works for ESPN, reported that Dan Lanning is generating buzz in NFL coaching circles. Oh no, I'm terrified. Yeah. So a couple things. First of all, feel free to clip all of this, internet, and play it later. If Dan Lanning becomes an NFL coach at the end of the season, I'm not particularly worried about it. First of all. Second of all, Dan Lanning has never coached in the NFL before. This is a one-sided article that I think has two purposes. Number one, Jeremy Fowler has a job. That job is to write articles, write pieces that gets people's attention. This is going to get people's attention. It's going to continue to do so. I'm leading my show with it for a reason. I'm not blaming Jeremy Fowler for that. As someone who's in the content creation business, I get it. I understand where he's coming from. But the article is one-sided in that, well, yeah, the NFL is keeping an eye on what Dan Lanning's doing at Oregon. Okay, congratulations. There's nothing in here about a team. There is nothing in here about interest from Dan Lanning, who, might I remind you, turned down the Alabama job to stay at Oregon. So with a guy who's never coached, he has never had a coaching stop in the NFL. His coaching stops have been at Park Hill South High School, Pittsburgh, Arizona State, Sam Houston, Alabama, Memphis, Georgia, and Oregon. That's where he's been. Never been to the NFL. Never been tied to the NFL before. One NFL executive saying, yeah, he's got some Dan Campbell in him. Yeah, put me in the camp of that doesn't fire me up in the worried sense of, Lanning could leave to go to the NFL. This is a guy who is currently making about $7 million a year. And guess what? He's got an agent who also has a job. I think this is entirely an instance of guys doing their jobs to drum up a little noise, to make people look, think, feel uneasy, and maybe there is real interest from some NFL team. I don't know who that team would be right about now, number one. Number two, Dan Lanning's incredibly well taken care of at Oregon. And number three, he's got an agent whose job it is to continually search to get him a better contract, and that enriches the agent as well. And this screams agent leak. That's what this feels like more than anything to me, is the agent puts this out there. Dan Lanning's making $7.5 million this year. His contract continues to go up. He can be at Oregon as long as he wants, but is he the highest paid coach in college football? No, but he's got the number one team in the country. Oregon's been number one in the AP poll for the last month or so, and they've been ever since they beat Ohio State and then Texas lost and whatnot. I don't remember the exact date of that happening, but they've been number one in the rankings. Like, everybody's looking up at Oregon right now. But there are several coaches that make more than Dan Lanning does. There are coaches that make 9, 10. Kirby's making 13, I think, at Georgia. Like, there are bigger numbers on an annual basis of coaching salaries in college football. And this is probably Dan Lanning's agent putting something out there to say, all right, well, now Oregon's got to pony up, or hey, what about this interest over there? That's what that feels like to me. That's what it feels like. And then here's the third component of why I am not worried about this. I really am not, because I think that, like I said, I think this is just created by people who have a job to do. I understand it, but I'm going to call that out for what it looks like to me, and that is those guys just working in mysterious back channel sort of ways and using the media to their advantage. I've got no real problem with that. That's the way the world works. People should just, I think, be well aware of that. But the other thing too, do you think an NFL team would hire a coach that hasn't won a national championship yet? Do you think Dan Lanning hasn't won a national championship? He hasn't even won a conference championship. So the NFL could be looking at what he's doing and say, boy, I like that cultural style. I mean, look at the way he talks to his team in the locker room on Ducks versus them. That's great. Okay, you could like that all you want, but he hasn't won a national championship yet. And Chip Kelly didn't win a national championship, but he got to the national championship game before going to the NFL. He'd worked in the NFL, and it had always been pretty clear that Chip Kelly wanted to leave college football. I've never gotten that indication from Dan Lanning. One marker that people who cover college football recruiting look at when the coaching carousel comes up with regards to whether someone wants to stay at a particular location. Well, is he recruiting? Yeah, Dan Lanning's recruiting. Dan Lanning's always been recruiting. If you have kind of wishy-washy mentality about recruiting, you have probably a greater chance that you're going to leave, either because you want to go to a different spot or you want to go to the NFL. Dan Lanning doesn't strike me as an NFL guy. Yes, schematically, Lanning is very good, and we've seen that imprint take place on both sides of the ball over the last couple of years, and he's done a really good job. He does not strike me as someone who doesn't like recruiting because he does it very well and he does it very aggressively in every single facet in the new world of college football recruiting. And he is someone who I don't think is just a scheme guy that wants to just show up and coach ball. I think he likes that aspect of it. Chip Kelly left UCLA to be Ohio State's offense coordinator. Why? Doesn't like recruiting. Never has. Never been his MO. That's not Dan Lanning here. So I think every sign points towards Dan Lanning staying. And then the coaches that get hired in the NFL recently, Jim Harbaugh is doing well with the Chargers. He'd been in the NFL before. Urban Meyer, I don't think he'd been in the NFL before, but he'd won national championships at two different spots. I don't know that there's an NFL franchise that would take a chance on that after what just happened with Matt Rule, who is having some success at Nebraska and I think will continue doing a good job. That's our Big Ten brethren, Nebraska, by the way. But I wonder if that scares off NFL front offices to even look at a guy like Dan Lanning who hasn't won at that sort of level. And then if Lanning does win a national championship with Oregon and leaves for the NFL, well, it's going to sting a whole heck of a lot less because he will have been the first Oregon coach to ever do that. But I go back to the video that came out in January, as a lot of people did when this article was flying around online, that there were rumors he was going to leave. And I know the interest from Alabama was very real. But as he said, the grass is damn green in Eugene. Don't be surprised if in the offseason Dan Lanning gets a contract raise as a result of this. But I felt this had to be addressed because I'm sure it was on plenty of Oregon fans' minds of, hey, wait, what do you mean he's going to the NFL? A guy who's never coached in the NFL, he has not been a position coach. He has not been a coordinator. He has not been a volunteer assistant. Nothing. He has been college football through and through. He feels very much like a college football guy to me. How in the world, here's the thing about this. How could you, as an NFL organization, look at Dan Lanning and say, we want to hire him before we want to hire Kirby Smart? Where's Kirby Smart's name? Kirby Smart's already got a big-time contract. Dan Lanning has got a really big contract, a long one. He's got plenty of money. He's doing fine. But there's always more, and people will always take more if they can get more. And I think that's what's happening here. So my concern level is a 1 out of 10. 1 out of 10. That's how worried I am about Dan Lanning leaving Oregon to go to the NFL. Let me know your thoughts in YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. All right, let's get back to football. Because Oregon plays Wisconsin this week. Might not be easy, but it could be easy. 3 things Oregon's got to do to make it easy are coming up next. And coming up right now, Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off gourmet gifts site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's it. Just COLLEGE is the promo code. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience. I'm a big steak guy myself, and Omaha Steaks is where you want to go for gifting them to your loved ones. And the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks and mouthwatering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with the promo code COLLEGE and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. Check out omahasteaks.com. All right, keys to the game here against Wisconsin. Let's start with the penalties. That is key number one. That's along with running the football, which I talked about a lot on yesterday's show, and I'll get to that more in just a sec. This is the number one thing coming out of the Maryland game I think most Oregon fans should want to see. It is the ability to go from, hey, Oregon had a 12 penalty game to can you have something closer to what they did against Michigan, where they had 2 penalties for 10 yards, which is astonishingly good. You can't do that every week. It's just not possible. But can you keep it to 5 penalties or fewer? Or can you keep it at least under 50 penalty yards? This Wisconsin offense this year in big games hasn't been good. When they have faced high-quality opponents, when they face Alabama, their quarterback did get hurt in that game, but they only had 10 points. And against Penn State, they only managed 13 points. So if you don't give them a helping hand, I don't know that against this Oregon defense, they're going to be able to consistently move the ball up and down the field. Now, as I've talked about this week, Braden Locke can make some throws. He can do some good things. He can also turn the football over. And I'd be pretty surprised if Oregon doesn't have at least 1 turnover in this game after forcing 3 last week against Maryland, who has a similar offense with the way they want to throw the football first and foremost. But I think Wisconsin's got a little bit more capable of a ground game. But first and foremost for Oregon's defense, I think they played well against Maryland last week if you take out the penalties. Get out of your own way. Don't give them free chances to go down the field and keep drives alive, because I think the penalties last week, it gave Maryland 6 or 7 first downs. It probably gave them around 10 points that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And I think that I'd love to see Oregon going into the bye week deliver a single-digit defensive performance on the road. They're very capable of that. I don't know that they'll clean up everything in 1 week's time, but I think if you take away the penalties, Oregon's defense will be in a pretty good spot. Second key to the game is win the rushing battle. This is a two-way key here. Yes, Wisconsin wants to throw the football more, but when they had success in that 3-game stretch against Purdue, Rutgers, and Northwestern, they ran the ball really well. They had a 300-yard rushing game. They were over 200 yards in those contests. Like they did a really good job of running the football. So I think that's secondary to Oregon being able to run the football here, because if they're able to go down the field, like this offense as a whole for Oregon against any opponent, when they can run the football, it becomes really dangerous. Because if you have to bring an extra safety down into the box and leave your corners one-on-one on the outside. Now, Wisconsin's got an NFL caliber cornerback out there, but I still like Oregon's receiving core, and I expect those things that weren't quite clicking the passing game to get cleaned up a little bit now that it's their second full week, but almost third game without Tez Johnson playing out there. I think for Oregon, the ability to run the football, just to keep that Wisconsin defense honest so they can't just sit on the pass and lean into their strengths, I think that'll be really, really beneficial here. So when Wisconsin's offense has been at its best, they've had a good running game to go with throwing the football with Braden Locke. But for Oregon's offense to be fully explosive and dynamic and take some play action shots down the field, there has to be an actual threat of running the ball. So running it particularly early in the game, I think is really important to kind of set the tone and make the defense think, okay, I know we're really good against the pass. Do we need to just leave our corners on islands out there? And I trust Evan Stewart against anybody. I'll trust Evan Stewart again. He's not going to win every single matchup, but he's going to win a pretty good amount of them. And you got T. Ferg and Trayshawn Holden's there, and Justice Lowe, of course, has done some really, really nice things in the last few weeks. So I think for Oregon, winning the rushing battle and outrunning Wisconsin, particularly early in the game, I think can be a tone setter. And then finally, I've had this key a couple times, and I think Oregon's done a solid job this year, knock on wood, of avoiding this when I brought it up, but avoid the mistakes on special teams. So Camp Randall is a fantastic environment. My impression or memory that flashes to mind anytime I think of Camp Randall was post-COVID, when we finally were back to normal with college football fans being in the stands. One of my favorite college football moments watching on TV, because it was so frustrating and I of course understood why it was the case, but watching watching games without fans in the stands, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. It was missing something. And Wisconsin played, I forget who it was, but they played a game on Fox, and instead of going to commercial break, they stayed on the shot while Wisconsin's fans did jump around, which is, some Oregon fans might know, it's their version of shout. It's what they do at the end of the third quarter, going to the fourth. And it was fantastic. And we've been waiting for so long, it felt like, to get the fans back, and we finally had them. And watching that spectacle take place and knowing, hey, we can have these moments again, was the most relieving and exciting feeling as a college football fan. And that's what I think of every time I think of Camp Randall. So when you've got a crowd like that certainly is going to get up for the number one team in the country and show up. Like, Wisconsin's a decent team. It's not as if their season's completely in the dumps. You know, they're fighting for bowl eligibility, and it's just Luke Fickell's second year, but they've got a chance, and they're 14.5-point dogs. Bigger underdogs have won outright this year. Kentucky beat Ole Miss, Vanderbilt beat Alabama, Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame. Like, those things have happened. And so I don't think that's going to happen here, but the crowd's going to be there, and nothing gets a crowd going more like a special teams blunder. So stay away from those things. Don't fumble a punt return or a kick return. Just catch the ball. Just get it to the offense. Take a touchback. That's okay. Don't allow a blocked field goal, block punt, punt return. Like, those moments can really spark a crowd to life, even if Oregon has a lead. Let's say Oregon jumps out to a 10-0 lead. You know what Wisconsin will be looking for? They'll be looking for an explosive play. They'll be looking for something to change the game and to get the crowd back into it. And special teams can be that. And I think the last time I had this highlighted as a key was Ohio State, and Oregon botched an extra point. Now, thankfully, Oregon was at home, but still got a little closer. That Oregon won by just 1 point and came up empty after scoring a touchdown twice in that game. So I think those three things are going to help Oregon get a big win. And again, as I mentioned on yesterday's show, these are keys to Oregon winning by 20 to 28 or 30 points, not just winning the game outright. They could do none of these things, still find a way to win the football game. It'll just be uncomfortable, shall we say, more so than Oregon fans would like it to be. So clean up the penalties, win the rushing battle, offense, defense, got to be good in the ground game there, and avoid special teams mistakes. You do those things, I think Oregon goes out and wins pretty comfortably. If they start forcing turnovers, this is my honorable mention key to the game. If they force turnovers with Wisconsin's just going to struggle to move the football. That's just how their offense has been this year when Braden Locke has turned it over. Like most teams, it's really hard to score points. So my prediction is Oregon 31, Oregon 34. 34, and my score predictions for Oregon this year have been really, really good. Against the spread, not quite as good this year, but I think Oregon wins. I think Oregon covers 34-17. I don't know exactly how it's going to look. I don't know if Oregon's going to run the ball a ton, if they'll run it some, as they kind of have in the past, and lean on Dylan Gabriel. Like, I don't know exactly how it's going to look. I just have the sense that with the bye week looming, and after the way Oregon played against Maryland last week, this is a game where Oregon comes out and plays really well. I can see them winning by more than that. I can see them winning by less than that. But I think Oregon wins. I think Oregon covers 34-17. And I think if they hit 175 or more on the ground, especially if they get to that 200 mark, if they're in the 200, 220 range, running the football this week with Jordan James and Noah Whittington, maybe sprinkle in a bit of Dylan Gabriel as well, then I think this game could really get away from Wisconsin. I think the ceiling on the score this week is kind of in that 49 to 10 sort of range. I think the floor, I think Oregon could lose a game. I've seen way crazier upsets happen, but I think Oregon's going to be able to go in and roll the Badgers. 34-17, I'm taking the Ducks. Let me know your score predictions below in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. A couple other things to talk about. A couple of you asked questions about a variety of things. Schedule, playoff scenarios. Both worth discussing, and I will do so coming up next. Right after I talk about FanDuel, get ready to tackle the NFL action after college football with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you want to bet college football in the meantime, Oregon minus 14.5 or Oregon plus 4 or Wisconsin plus 14.5 at Oregon plus 14.5. If only, you can do that over at FanDuel.com. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. FanDuel.com, that's where you go to join. Again, $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Mailbag time with the bye week next week. Let me know all your bye week questions, where Oregon should be focused, and this, that, and the other thing and such. I imagine both of these topics, or one of these topics, the second one, could come up a couple of times. But YouTube comments, X formerly known as Twitter, at @SMcLaughlinCFB or at LockedOnDucks. Those are the handles. DMs and mentions are wide open. Or if you want priority access and a bunch of other perks, go become a Locked On Ducks insider. That link is in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. Aaron asks, how much stock can you put into Maryland being more difficult of an opponent since they were coming off a bye? Can we expect something similar from Wisconsin? Also, how the heck is Oregon the only team in the Big Ten to play 8 straight weeks of conference opponents and have their final 2, technically 3 games, have their opponents coming off bye weeks? Yeah, so Washington will be off a bye next week. Wisconsin's off a bye at home here. Maryland was off a bye coming to Oregon a week ago. So I think giving Oregon a home game, like of the final 3, this is the one that you would most make you kind of scratch your head and go, wait, how is that? Because it's off a bye for the other team and they're at home. But in last week's game against Maryland and in the next game, November 30th against Washington, those teams are coming off a bye, but Oregon is at home. And Oregon will also be off a bye next week against Washington as well. Conferences try to align bye weeks, particularly for rivalry matchups, because I think that can get, extra testy and fuel the flames. Well, they were coming off a bye, and that wasn't fair. But the reality is, if you're a good enough football team, and Oregon certainly is, those sorts of things shouldn't matter. Now, do I put some stock into the game last week, into Maryland coming off a bye and Oregon not? Not really. I mean, you could maybe put a little bit of that sloppiness in there, but I didn't see that sloppiness the week prior against Michigan. They had the muff punt return, but that was putting a true freshman out there. And I don't anticipate that happening again this season because Gary Bryant Jr. was back returning punts while Tez Johnson's out. I imagine he will continue doing so. But I think that Oregon is at the point where they're not operating on the margins. For a team like Wisconsin, yeah, that could be the difference in hanging around a little bit longer than they otherwise would have. If, Wisconsin played a game last week, gotten a little beat up, been just a little bit more tired or had an injury or two the way Oregon's dealing with right now, yeah, maybe Wisconsin would lose by more than they're, however many I think they're going to this weekend. And Oregon's just not a team that's been operating on the margins. Ohio State is the only team to play Oregon to a single possession game. They're the only one. Everyone else has lost by at least 21 points. And yeah, I think Wisconsin can hang around. One of the reasons that I've got Wisconsin losing by only, quote unquote, 17 points is they're at home and they're off a bye. But do I think that is ultimately, like that? It's more like an excuse than it is a reason, because at the end of the day, you line up, you play 60 minutes of football. This guy's dinged up, that guy's dinged up, next man up mentality. Coaches say that all the time. Well, you got to be able to have that. And I think Oregon has done a good job. I thought the offensive line did well last week without Marcus Harper. I think the receiving core will be more in sync with Dylan Gabriel this week, but they also did really, really well without Tez Johnson for most of the Michigan game. Gabriel was 297, 2 touchdowns. Should have had another one to Evan Stewart, if not for an ineligible man down the field. So I don't think this is the schedule screwing Oregon here. It's just, everyone has a stretch like this where you say, that's not the best spot. LSU and Ole Miss, for example. Ole Miss went to Baton Rouge, playing their, I think, 7th straight game, and LSU was at home off a bye. It happens sometimes. There are too many teams, there are too many games, there's too much to navigate for everyone to have, the exact same scheduling breaks. But most of the time, especially in rivalry games, you will have both teams coming off a bye. Texas and Oklahoma had a bye before they played. Ohio State and Michigan, I think both don't have byes before they play this week. Like it tends to line up. It just doesn't happen to here. But when you look at Oregon's schedule overall, as I said in the offseason a lot, it's a favorable schedule. Your only road non-conference game was against Oregon State, and it was the second easiest of the 3. And Oregon won the game 49-14. It's just, that's the way it goes sometimes. And, Oregon had a bye before the Michigan State game to begin had a bye before the UCLA game to begin conference play. So they had a bye before they had to go on the road, which is typically what a team does, but not all of the time when the conference makes these schedules. And Oregon played well in that game. Didn't play perfectly. Dylan Gabriel threw a pick six, and they only won 34-13. So I think bye weeks can serve a purpose, but they can also be a drawback to where a team, rest versus rust. I don't know that we've settled that debate in the NFL or in college football. So long-winded answer to say that assessing Oregon's schedule of, will they play 8 straight games? Yeah, it's just kind of the way it works out sometimes. It probably won't be the case next year. They'll probably have a bye. They probably won't have a bye before the Washington game. They'll probably have a bye somewhere around the time they would have played Purdue or Michigan State. Like there are just a lot of factors that go into scheduling. I don't think this was the Big Ten trying to, give Oregon the short end of the stick. Last thing here, this one from Judson. Can you talk about the 5 seed? Because in my opinion, as much as I want the Ducks to win the Big Ten title, the 5 seed in the playoff predictions has constantly looked very good with the likelihood of playing Boise State. And if you win, most likely playing either the Big 12 or ACC champion, which I don't think will be near as hard as playing the 8 or 9 seed. Depends on the 8 or 9 seed. Kind of the same conversation, right? Rest versus rust. If Oregon doesn't win the Big Ten and they have a home playoff game, pretty confident they're going to win. How much better is Oregon today than the last time they played Boise State, where they won, and Boise State has been a really good team this year. They're probably going to go on, win the Mountain West, and be in the college football playoff. Good for them. They deserve it. But do I feel drastically different about Oregon's national title hopes if they're the 5 seed versus if they're the 1 seed? No. No, I don't. Because, yeah, you have the opportunity to play a Big 12 or ACC champion in the quarterfinal, if that is, in fact, how the seeding works out. We don't know for certain. But I think in the current 12-team bracket, Oregon would play the winner of like Indiana, Tennessee if they stayed as the 1 seed and won the Big Ten. Like if the bracket ended today, they'd play, I'm pretty sure it was Indiana and Tennessee. But I don't put a ton of stock into that because the ultimate goal is not to reach the college football playoff semifinal. Ultimate goal is win the national championship. And to do that, whether you have to play an extra game or not, you're going to have to beat a couple of top 4, 5, 6 teams. So whether you've got that first round game, whether you don't have that first round game, I don't think that changes Oregon's path dramatically. Like, you're either good enough to beat every team in college football or you're not. Like, if you get a more favorable matchup in the quarterfinal, if you're not actually good enough to beat a team that is one of the 3 or 4 best in college football, then you're going to lose in the semifinal. And sure, it's great to extend it for a week. Yeah, that's fine, the whole 9 yards and whatnot. But I really don't think that either way. I think Oregon can win a national championship if they don't win the Big Ten and they get the 5 seed, or if they do win the Big Ten and they have the 1 seed. Either way, the path is there. I think Oregon's just got to play what's in front of them. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.